need that. Well, good morning again. Today is Christ the King Sunday, hence the white outfit. It's also the last Sunday of the church year, so we're leaving year B. And next week, Advent starts, so that means Christmas is 5 weeks away. But I don't want you to worry about that yet, because please, we have to have a good and reflective Advent. Now, it seems weird maybe that we're kind of jumping to the end of the story here, right before we get to the beginning of the story, when we start Advent and Christmas. The reason is, in brief, because we're going to read about Jesus' second coming before we experience his first coming, which is Christmas. Anyway, so today we get to the time right before his crucifixion in John, and Pilate is questioning Jesus, and Pilate wants to know if Jesus is a king. So he replies, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." And then later he says, "I came into the world to testify to the truth." And then Pilate says, in the next line, which we didn't read, Pilate says, "What is truth?" And that's a really good question. What is Jesus talking about? Where is this kingdom? Is Jesus kind of taking a dig at his disciples for not fighting back? And what is truth? Well, I'm sure Pilate was wondering all these things. And what it comes down to is power. Power is what Pilate has over Jesus, the power to set him free or to let him be killed. And Pilate gets this power from Caesar, from Rome, and the kingdom that he rules over, which is part of Israel. But Jesus' kingdom is not from this world, but that doesn't mean it's not on this world, because it's not actually a place. We tend to think of kingdoms in terms of location, right? Having borders and all that. But it is not so with Jesus' kingdom. Caroline Lewis explains that Jesus' kingdom was never a place, but a perspective, never an established rule, but a stated reality of how to live. So it's about living in the kingdom wherever we are and where the power comes from. Because Pilate's power comes from Rome, but Jesus' comes from God. Now, Jesus was crucified because the people weren't happy with the truth that he was telling. The truth that God is love, and that the systems of the world were faulty. They wanted a Messiah to come and take over against Rome and become king in the traditional sense. They didn't want this hippie-ish, peace-loving guy, right? And it's not all their fault, because that's all they know. That's what society taught them. Kings come to power through violence, by taking it, or by political maneuvering, not by helping people and caring for the poor. The primary tool for taking power in the ancient world was violence. And you could argue that it still is that way now. But we end up caving into societal pressure sometimes, and we want God to be that God that comes down from on high and wipes out all the people we don't like. And that's ingrained to us in our culture, because our world tends to operate on a quid pro quo basis. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And it also operates on the idea of, I can do it by myself and me first. Now, I can admit that sometimes when somebody does something nice for me out of the blue, I kind of get suspicious and wonder what they want, or like if they're buttering me up, which I know I shouldn't do that, but I can't help it, because that's how our world works, right? But that's not how God's world works. That's not how Jesus' kingdom runs. Jesus came instead to give us this truth that God's love is unconditional, and that God offers us grace, love, and hope with no strings. We don't have to accept it, but when we do accept it, we in turn then will show God's grace, love, and hope to the rest of the world. Now, violence and anger beget more violence and anger. That's Pilate's world. And Jesus is not from that. In Jesus' kingdom, violence and anger is against God's will. Nothing ever gets solved that way anyway, as we know from thousands of years of history. Instead, we should try compassion, love, and understanding. Now, the disciples don't fight back against Pilate and the other accusers because they ran away. So they couldn't fight back, but also because Jesus didn't really want them to. Instead of rising up and taking his throne by force, Jesus is enthroned onto the suffering of the cross. And this shows us strength in weakness, power in vulnerability, and justice through mercy instead of revenge. That's the power of God, the power to forgive. And this is all really good in theory, right? But how do we live in our current world where anger and violence are the norm and ever present and real? What can we possibly do? Well, we can witness to God's love and speak up against things that are wrong and show the world that there is another way to solve problems. We are called as Christians to be different and to change the world for the better in love and not by force. And Jesus knew this back in ancient times. He knew that being the king the people wanted was not the way. And Pilate's rule over the people inspired terror, while Jesus came to inspire instead love and charity and kindness. And to repeat what Caroline Lewis said that I read earlier, Jesus' kingdom is a state of being, a way to live, a commitment to a particular way to view the world. It's a very important thing to remember, because it's all about how we choose to view the world and how we choose to act in the world. The kingdom comes from God in having a relationship with God, and from our prayers and our actions in the world in love, on behalf of God. Everything we do, we should think, is this what God would want me to do? We are the beacons of light and hope that will chase darkness away in the world. We have that power from God. We need to own it and use it and bring the heavenly kingdom into our world, because we really do need that now. And one way that we do this is by baptizing our babies. I could give you a history of baptism, but that would take all day. So we'll skip that part. But baptism is when we welcome new members into our fold and pray for them and spread love in the world, because who doesn't love a baby? So I'll be quiet and we'll get on to the baptism. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.